Oh boy. This is going to be a little different from my regular content, so I apologize if it's not your thing. And more than likely, you've heard a lot about this situation already, but here's the TLDR if you haven't. Carl Jobst was sued by Billy Mitchell for defamation. By many accounts, this lawsuit was about Jobst's claims about Mitchell cheating at video games, considering the context of both Jobst's channel and the other lawsuits Mitchell was involved in at the time. As it turned out, what this was actually about ultimately was Jobst accusing Mitchell of being part of the reason that Apollo legend committed suicide, and Mitchell also being pretty happy that he committed suicide. The reason for Jobst accusing Mitchell of this pretty heinous act was that Legend had also made videos about Mitchell. Mitchell sued, and a settlement took place. At the time, Jobst claimed that this was a large cash settlement, and his evidence was a Reddit post, which some people claim is from a reputable leaker who had commented on other related settlements. Jobst painted the picture that Legend, along with health problems which caused him to be unable to find work to pay off massive debt caused by the suit with Mitchell, committed suicide from the stress of the compounding problems this caused. There were also text messages unearthed from Mitchell to another person that seemed to indicate he was happy about Apollo dying, as it was presented by Jobst in his video. In reality, this cash settlement was never a thing, according to Apollo's brother. Apollo had to remove videos talking about Mitchell and had to promise not to speak about Mitchell ever again, or he would be fined $25,000. I frankly just don't know enough about Billy Mitchell to comment on whether or not he's a good person. There's a lot of parties involved in his making and subsequent unmaking, so to speak. But the inciting incident was that his Donkey Kong score at a Twin Galaxies convention, the supposed first to be over 1 million points, was then revoked as another member of the convention, Jeremy Young, challenged the score and 2 other scores of Mitchell's in 2017, claiming that they were achieved on hardware that was not original Donkey Kong arcade software. I won't pretend to understand everything about speedrunning and how it works, but all I can say is that there's a reason in Doom why GC Doom speedruns aren't as widely accepted as runs from more vanilla ports. However, I don't know many people who built their entire livelihoods from Doom speedrunning as Mitchell did with his scores, regardless of what their legitimacy was, so I'll refrain from speaking on what kind of damage being accused of that kind of thing could cause. What is relevant that is he's pursued a lot of litigation over the years, which will inevitably cause anger and frustration among people who believe he cheated at a game and believe he is silencing people who are critiquing him, which has caused him to have a less than stellar reputation. But Mitchell not being a reputable person does not mean he is immune from being defamed, or as Mitchell may argue, being defamed further. And to be completely honest, I think Jobst and his lawyers did an incredibly poor job of crafting a defense that in any way made sense, and Jobst's video about the matter doesn't help him much either. So let's start at the top, the accusation itself. We know what the defaming statement is. Jobst accusing Mitchell of being indirectly responsible for Apollo's suicide. But how was it handled? It was first posted in a video published on May 26, 2021, talking about Todd Rogers and Billy Mitchell's, their cheating allegations, and litigations they were involved in. The statement in question is posted around 16:45 of the video. Some of the pieces of the original statement are on the version of the video that exists today, but I'm getting ahead of myself. On the 3rd of June, Mitchell responded on YouTube, and a few hours after posting this response, Jobst had taken that part of the video out. Jobst claims he took it out before Mitchell posted his response, and Mitchell claimed he had checked before posting his response, but either way, Mitchell responded and Jobst took some of the offending words out. It's worth noting that Mitchell republished the original statement Jobst made about him in order to respond to it, which is going to come back later. The reason Jobst had taken the statement out is because through Keemstar, Mitchell expressed extreme discomfort with the assertion about the settlement because it wasn't true. Jobst told Keem he would take that part of the video out and also contact Apollo's brother to confirm what the actual details of the settlement were, which he did both. He also tweeted that Mitchell was threatening to sue him, so he was taking the statement out of the video. Even though he still believed it to be true, he just didn't want it to be the reason he was sued. He doubles down on this on June 6th in a YouTube comment, and on the 7th, Mitchell's lawyers send him a concern letter about this, and Jobst seems very excited about the idea of going to war in court over it. On the 9th, without hearing back from Apollo's brother, Jobst reinstated the statement he made in its entirety on the video. I guess he was high off his own farts or something, because I can't fathom for the life of me why he'd do this without hearing back from the more reputable source that he was already in contact with. Even though Mitchell said he would sue regardless, which, to be honest, seems like an action Mitchell would take and ultimately did, why continue to make yourself look worse? And on the 13th, he finally hears back from Apollo's brother. The actual details of the settlement and the version of the video as it exists is now created. About 6 weeks later, on July 29th, Jobst issues an actual retraction about the original statement, but it's not on its own video. It's at the end of a video about no-hit Dark Souls fronters.
Now, before I finish the video, I would like to take this opportunity to correct something that I said in a previous video. Back in May, I talked about the new lawsuits filed by Todd Rogers and Billy Mitchell. In that video, I made the claim that Apollo Legend paid money to Billy Mitchell as part of their settlement. I would never make such a claim unless I had very good evidence to support my position. In response to this, Billy Mitchell released a video accusing me of lying and claimed that no money was exchanged. He didn't provide any evidence to back up this claim, nor did he attempt to get in contact with me to clear up any misinformation I may have had. However, I did investigate further, as I would never want to provide false information to my viewers. I reached out to a member of Apollo's family who graciously agreed to clarify some details. According to them, despite Mitchell's best efforts, Apollo Legend would not pay any money, and in the final version of the settlement, there was no clause indicating that he was required to do so. Therefore, the statement I made in that video was almost certainly incorrect. I sincerely apologize for providing false information, and no matter what kind of relationship I have with Mitchell, I do not believe that it is ever justified to lie or mislead. Mitchell also claimed that I was accusing him of murder. This is certainly not the case. I do have my opinion regarding the impact of the settlement on Apollo's decision, but ultimately, it was no one's responsibility but his own. The only reason I mentioned it in that video was because I felt like it was important to let you know what happened, as I know many of you enjoyed his videos. As always, thank you so much for watching, you legends. I hope you are having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video.
So a few things about this. For one, I don't care how supposedly reliable a Reddit leaker is. It's Reddit. There doesn't seem to be any indication that Jobst asked any follow-up questions, and the message itself is not entered into evidence. It also appears to have been deleted off the site. Jobst's I Lost video claims that one of these users spoke to Apollo directly,
with one of them even claiming to have spoken with Apollo directly. Obviously, a Reddit post isn't usually very credible, but this person made these comments and was talking about the settlement before the settlement was even public, which implied to me that they knew what they were talking about and it was trustworthy.
But none of the evidence on screen proves this. Although there is a Facebook DM conversation that mentions that somebody was talking to Billy Mitchell Jr. about the case, which seems to indicate that the settlement wasn't actually for that much money, or at least not as much money as Mitchell wanted. The rest is a bunch of third-hand information by people who were not in contact with Mitchell or Apollo directly. The post Jobst spends the most time talking about was deleted and also had a couple of downvotes, which doesn't particularly mean anything, but certainly feels flimsy as evidence, both in popularity and credence, even by Reddit standards. This more says to me that Jobst was looking for anything to prove his case, even though this ignores the fact that this comment also blames Dark Viper AU, a person who will come up again later. I don't know how he came to the conclusion that this person talked to Apollo directly. This was just essentially a rehashing of information Apollo put in his goodbye video. Also interesting was that Jobst said, well, EasyScapes also said it, while not mentioning that 1, EasyScapes was also someone blamed by Apollo for his own death, and 2, EasyScapes credited Jobst and his source for help with research. This doesn't help him, but Jobst certainly seems to think it does. It's also worth mentioning that Apollo himself had made a post explaining that Billy now had ownership of Apollo's videos about him, and that Apollo could no longer speak about Billy. The first person to comment on this post? Carl Jobst. So while Apollo did not confirm or deny that cash was part of his settlement with Mitchell, the difference from what was allegedly in the Reddit post, which was a cash settlement along with the videos being taken down and subsequently owned by Mitchell, should have at least given Jobst pause before he just asserted that it was debt from the suit that caused Apollo to take his own life. And by the way, the post about the settlement is still on Apollo's channel to this day for anyone to access, as well as Jobst's comment. The only people asserting any sum of money was involved were people that weren't even involved in the case, and are also attempting to save their own skin by saying that the judgment was wrong and Judge Barlow's the most gullible dude alive, and nitpicking how Mitchell's history was laid out and how he didn't consider evidence that Jobst didn't admit, aka his Twitter DM conversation based on Reddit speculation. Again, I had to reiterate, the burden is on Jobst to prove his claims, and ultimately, it does not seem that Jobst disagreed with any of this background information on Billy, given a previous filing that I'll talk about later. I also find it fairly gross that this person who was apparently feeding Jobst information, in my interpretation, says, "Thanks for nothing, dude," to Apollo, admonishing him for settling with Mitchell because it emboldened Mitchell to sue others. So what, was Apollo just supposed to get sicker and broker fighting this suit? Someone who was already not in a great mental state by all accounts? Doesn't seem like a very trustworthy person to get information from, in my opinion. Secondly, a question that goes unasked by this lawsuit, but one I am curious about. How long has Jobst had a point of contact with Apollo's brother? The messages with Keemstar seem to indicate he knew exactly how to get a hold of him, so why wouldn't he ask for the correct information in the first place, even ignoring he had seen Apollo's post about the settlement? Thirdly, this retraction is bogus. For one, anyone who's been on YouTube long enough understands how viewer retention drops the longer a video goes on. Funnily enough, this was actually brought up by Jobst's lawyer as a reason why the original defamatory statement has less impact, because it was so late in the video. I do appreciate, though, that the judge mentions that there are people who will have watched the entire thing. Retention rates aren't the be-all, end-all of YouTube, as much as I'm sure either of the parties involved would have liked that to be the case. It also doesn't change the steps in which Jobst took to publish that information online. There's also no indication in any of the video's branding or description that a retraction exists in the video at all. And also, for someone who will make any excuse to make a video about Billy Mitchell and nothing else, it doesn't make sense that he'd give information of any kind, but especially information this serious, in an offhand retraction at the end of an unrelated video. Now, to reiterate, I don't know any of the parties involved in this suit. I don't even really know Jobst's relationship with Apollo, if he had any, although having his brother's email may indicate they at least knew each other. But it seems to me in any case that it feels dishonest of Carl to say that he cares about people understanding the truth of the matter when he's hiding the story in a completely unrelated video nearly a month and a half later after everybody's probably already forgotten about it. I agree with this judge. I don't care if Jobst didn't use "because of Mitchell" in his defamatory statement. The judge correctly saw exactly how the internet works. In a paragraph, while I felt personally attacked, the judge states, "It has become apparent to me that during the trial, that many members of the online gaming and YouTube communities are not people whom the majority of society would consider to be reasonable, at least in their manners of expression and their willingness to insult, belittle, and verbally attack other people in online forums, usually anonymously. Many seem avid for scandal. This became particularly obvious from many of the comments on the offending video and other videos in evidence. Indeed, even Mr. DeWard described the YouTube forum as a sensationalized, extravagant, and dramatized forum that includes satire and, as Mr. Mitchell pleaded, is a medium evidently intended to provoke commentary." But hey, Judge Barlow's right in his assessment here. People, including myself, can be real dickheads on the internet, and it can somewhat change how certain statements are viewed, often in the most unflattering and uncharitable light possible, especially in the comments section of a channel that is already prone to confirmation bias, both for the creators and the viewers. This is also iterated upon in the section about the grapevine effect. Jobst had already given his large audience a million other, arguably more valid reasons to hate Mitchell. What was one more to add to the pile? I'll keep this short. Cheating on video games and suing people over them talking about it, and causing someone to game end themselves because of said lawsuits are accusations of two different levels of severity. The fact that Jobst couldn't make this distinction when he received the concerns notice from Mitchell is, frankly, his own damn fault. To be clear, Billy Mitchell's been mocked and lampooned for years now over his boy who cried wolf behavior over the video game cheating allegations. The man's been in and out of court over everything and anything, and even had an unflattering cameo in a Cartoon Network show, which he sued over. In other words, his reputation already sucked, but it's the kind of thing that anyone that's not terminally online could say is really not that big a deal. In the grand scheme of things, at least. I mean, we know of another infamous video game cheater who is doing much worse things with his time. To be clear, this isn't to say I don't think cheating at speedrunning in video games isn't a big deal. That's obviously taking advantage of opportunities that people more deserving won't get. I get annoyed that Elon Musk hasn't been TOS'd out of Path of Exile because he's kicking clearly more skilled players off the hardcore ladders, which those ladders could be subject for prizes in upcoming leagues if Grinding Gear Games decided they wanted to do that. And to be frank, this is basically the only reason I knew Jobst or Mitchell even existed. Jobst constantly talked about Billy Mitchell being a dirty, filthy cheater at video games. Later, I also saw he was covering Doom stuff, which is nice, and I'd see his videos pop up from time to time in communities I'm in, but mostly, it was lampooning Billy Mitchell for cheating on video games. This was basically a done deal, and I would think that Jobst would have continued to see success with this kind of content, even if I don't agree with the exploitative nature of it. So it just kind of baffles me that Jobst would feel the need to double down on this disinformation, even if only in the short term, about how Apollo's lawsuit went down and the harm it allegedly caused. He didn't actually need it to make Mitchell out to be a shitty person by his own standards. Mitchell's actions have often come off as unreasonable to most, which I'll personally refrain from commenting on the veracity of the suits because I really don't know enough about them. But clearly to Jobst and his audience, as well as others in overlapping audiences, the lawsuits were not the most well-intentioned. Sore loser behavior, if you will. And although anyone who's made money by uploading on YouTube would say that Apollo losing income from the videos that he had to take down due to the suit would have been less than ideal, there were clearly other things happening around the same time that caused Apollo to make the choice to take his own life. And he did outwardly blame two other people, who were Carl's friends at the time. So it'd be inadvisable to make up any definitive statements as to what actual role Mitchell had, if any, in Apollo's death. And to button this up, I feel really bad for Apollo's family. I can't imagine what it's like to lose a family member in such a tragic way, and then have that family member's death be brought up countless times over years of lawsuits and videos just because another YouTuber felt the need to speak for that family member. I understand Carl may have just been passionate about it, like I said. I don't know what his relationship with Apollo was, but to then have to drag this out over nearly 4 years of lawsuits can't have been great for Apollo's family, who probably just wanted to grieve him in peace. To be fair, I don't know Carl's relationship with Apollo's family, maybe they supported this, but in any case, it feels extremely unhealthy, in my opinion, to have this be the situation at all. I can't say for sure whether or not Carl actively lied to his audience about what the suit was ultimately about. It can be said that as early as 2022, public documents were available that listed the accusations about Apollo Legend as part of the suit, although it does not appear to be the main part of the suit. Rather, more of the allegations are around accusations around cheating. This early filing was, funnily enough, about Jobst making Billy put his money where his mouth was and attempting to make Billy pay more security for costs, which in Australia is essentially a deposit that the plaintiff has to put in before the suit can continue, which is available to cover the defendant's costs. It's worth noting that orders like this being granted are rare, as Australian courts generally seem to understand that people wouldn't be bringing lawsuits frivolously, as they're costly if they lose. We ain't in America no more. But as weird as this case is, the judge did grant the order for further security for costs. Not for the $50,000 that Jobst requested, but for $15,000, bringing the total security for costs to $65,000. Also, a very interesting thing to note in this judgment is this paragraph. It seems that, notwithstanding the very serious nature of the allegations, the defendant did not anticipate the need to prove the allegations and has found himself deficient in preparation for a contest on the issues. It is argued that the practical consequence is that the trial will increase by 2 days to 5 days and require more arduous preparation, proofing those relevant witnesses and preparing their written and oral testimony, apparently not previously expected or accounted for in the estimated costs proffered on 27 October 2021 before the compromise on 8 November 2022. This is borne out in the comparison of the defendant's estimate proffered on 27 October 2021 and the estimate set out in the affidavit of the defendant's solicitor sworn on 5 July 2022. In plain English, that means Carl didn't think he'd actually have to prove the shit he said, despite saying a lot of it, and needs more time to think about it. Which seems to fly in the face of the reasoning he used to put the original statement about Apollo back up in the months before. At the very least, it seems to me for that all the bluster that Carl had about being totally ready, super ready to take Mitchell down, he hadn't actually anticipated he'd need to do that, for some reason, despite quite literally acknowledging that another YouTuber just like him had to go through the same process, and not only that, it was the inciting incident for his own lawsuit. Either way, he was either dishonest to the courts or dishonest to his fans, and while I can't say for sure whether or not he'd meant to, the conflicting stories are at the very least strange in my opinion. The thing that seems to be agreed upon by a lot of fans is that they were lied to by omission. And while I always advocate that you should be cautious of where you donate your money, I can't say Carl did a great job of explaining this on his GoFundMe, either in the original post, which explained Mitchell had filed more lawsuits, or the update he gave, which mentioned that Mitchell had dropped those additional lawsuits that were also about cheating on video games, and he would be using the donated money to continue the original suit while not elaborating what the suit was for. He would eventually close this GoFundMe after 200,000 AUD was raised. To Jobst's credit, he acknowledges he could have been clearer about his GoFundMe description, but it's worth noting GoFundMe and YouTube are two separate platforms, and not everybody who sees your GoFundMe will watch the video on a separate platform for more information, even though they probably should. However, it's worth noting that the imputations in the filing in 2022 are different from the imputations in the ruling that we saw a couple weeks ago. There are no imputations about Mitchell cheating in the case as it currently exists. They had, at some point, changed to be completely about Apollo Legend. So, I think at some point, a filing took place to change the scope of the lawsuit, which is a filing I don't have access to, although I speculate it may be at some point in 2023, which we'll get to in a second. This was likely a legal strategy by Mitchell to focus down on claims about him that he knew were provably false and specific to Jobst, although I can't say for certain. Whatever the timeline was, the case was about cheating mostly with a little bit of Apollo, and then it was not about cheating at all and all about Apollo. Either way, Carl did have time to make clarifying statements to the media and his viewers since he was yapping anyway, not just on YouTube, but elsewhere. I can't even particularly say Jobst spent the GoFundMe money in the smartest ways. In a strange filing in 2023, there's an argument about a number of places where he claims the lawsuit is vague, and one particular section stuck out to me as particularly petty. The defendant next complains of paragraph 2C of the statement of claim, however primarily of paragraph 4, which pleads that the defendant published the video on YouTube. This is defined in the pleading as the publication. The defendant argues that publication of defamatory matter by a defendant is an essential part of the cause of action, and in this case cannot be said to be complete unless and until the material, published on the internet, is downloaded onto the computer of a third person using a web browser to access it. See Down Jones & Co. Inc. versus Gutnick, 2002. Thus, the pleading does not properly plead publication, which is a material fact required to establish the cause of action. I mean, I guess technically yes, through case files and the like, this makes a certain sort of sense, but it just seems like a very strange point of contention to point out. And the judge also says this is just simply to be added onto the current suit's pleading as an additional context, not a reason to strike out the current definition of the publication altogether. There was also a point of contention that could basically be summed up as Jobst saying, "I was taken out of context, Your Honor," and the judge basically said, "Cool, add the context to the case then." This in particular I find, legally speaking, extremely funny. There's a section after that where Jobst challenges the relevance of a paragraph which talks about when Jobst first republished the original video with the less inflammatory statements. I find this to be kind of damning because this is essentially the smoking gun that Jobst at least understood that what he said was not totally correct if he didn't already know it before. In fact, if Jobst had been smart about that, he could have used that to his advantage, pointing out that he was attempting to mitigate any further harm to Mitchell by changing the statement to blame him less. There's a lot more points in this ruling that end up being better clarified as a result of this filing, but I find the information that Jobst attempted to have one of the more damning bits of information thrown out to be, at the very least, suspicious of Jobst's intentions of actually following through with the suit. Keep in mind, this wasn't just a motion to clarify some issues. Jobst was proposing a total rewrite of the pleading, which the judge did not go along with. And I honestly don't even think that Jobst wouldn't have had a point had he been smart about it, but he's going up against someone who he himself acknowledges spends a ton of time in the courts, who at least tries to play by the rules and has good lawyers who know how to navigate a courtroom. I'm not saying that Mitchell necessarily deserved to win this case, but it's very clear, at least to me, Jobst was grasping at straws in order to put himself in the right on this, and he just wasn't. I could say a lot about Jobst's potential ties to questionable right-wingers and his weird pickup artist phase.
Hi, Carl Jobst here, creator of ApproachHerNow.com. And if you're looking to increase your level of confidence around women and decrease the amount of anxiety you feel when you want to approach women, you've come to the right place. I have specifically created this website to help men who want more dates, relationships, and sex in their life, but just can't seem to make it happen because the act of approaching a woman is too difficult.
I want to be honest, but it's not particularly relevant to this case. But it makes a lot of what happened make sense. The fact that you can just say whatever you want and not face consequences, and the whole I was taken out of context thing was particularly damning to me. Jobst is, in my opinion, someone who does not like to admit he is wrong about anything. And that's scary because he has a gigantic audience that he's cultivated over the years, and whether earned or not, that means he has a particular burden to get things right. He's by no means the only person who has gotten things wrong on YouTube. He's not the first and definitely not the last. But at what point does one say, okay, yeah, I really should have handled this better and actually try to move forward? This isn't the only time Jobst has doubled down on his bullshit. Hopefully it'll be his last. But I don't know how he'll go back to doing what he was doing before. For better or worse, he'd made Billy Mitchell an inextricable part of his brand, and it backfired in the worst way possible. This case didn't just paint Jobst as a liar for this case, it's going to call his commentary for anything else into question. I also can't believe Jobst when he says, as he does in his trial, that he'd rather be doing anything but talking about Mitchell. He took a great amount of glee in the idea that Mitchell would sue him, milk the shit out of it for content, and it bit him in the ass. I had really begun losing respect for Jobst when the completionist situation went down. I'm not overly familiar with the details of the case, but I never get a good feeling when a YouTuber posts a thumbnail and title combination like this. And was Carl wrong in his accusations ultimately? Not really, no. But what if he was? I know that's flimsy and it sounds like I'm being a hater, which yeah, I guess I kind of am. But we're talking about legal cases here. I found out that a couple weeks after this video aired, the charity claimed to donate the majority of the money it was holding to a research foundation, and that the charity's since gone delinquent. I'm also a little suspicious of Jobst linking a Google Drive of the tax filings instead of the actual link where you get these filings at. I'm assuming in good faith the forms match, but he needs to link the proof at the place where it lives and archive it so if a legal case were to be filed, it'd be easy to prove that the evidence was legitimate. There was a real chance to actually hold people accountable, legally. And by tipping their hands, Jobst and Mutahar just kind of fucked that up entirely. I dislike the culture of YouTubers litigating cases that should really be in courts, because even though I don't particularly trust the legal system, especially not now, it has to be better than whatever this is. It's how Onision got away with his alleged grooming and abuse of other women before the case even got off the ground, with a laptop with evidence being held improperly by a third party in Chris Hansen's camp. While ultimately, I appreciate the thought that people should be held to account in the court of public opinion, if they need to be held to account in the rule of law, that needs to happen first. If this really was a case of open hand committing fraud, The case should have been brought to the attention of the FTC, or whatever relevant regulatory body there is. But this would have prevented them from making content about it for a while before the case was settled, which, while I understand the need for the content to keep going, surely Jobst could have just covered some more speedruns in the meantime? Same thing with the case here. Jobst couldn't help but yap the entire time, and he's still yapping. He claims he's appealing the case, and the publishing of the video he posted in the last week is not helping his case, if I'm honest. He's learned nothing, and I don't think this appeal will go through the way he hopes it will. I can only hope he doesn't attempt to fundraise from this community again, because no one can trust him. It's a bitter twist of irony, to be sure. And he seriously needs to get new lawyers if they're vetting his videos, because they are doing an incredibly poor job of it, if they are. He continues to claim that what Billy did and said regarding Apollo is worse, which is all well and good, but it doesn't change the fact that Jobst doubled down on incorrect information that ultimately did stain Mitchell's reputation further, whether deserved or not. I've said it a lot, but I'll say it again. Jobst, it was on you to prove that you didn't do a shitty thing, and you couldn't prove it because you did. I won't claim that I would know how to handle myself if a colleague committed suicide and blamed two of my friends for it after dealing with a common enemy, but I endeavored that this was a very poor way to handle it. And blaming the media when, of all places, the Daily fucking Mail did actually bring up the Apollo Legend issue, even in passing way back in 2022, an article you brought up, by the way, means that they were more honest and upfront about the suit than you were in your GoFundMe. I know it's easy to blame people for only reading headlines, but no, the media I've found did mention it, and they weren't hard to find. So while I agree people should be reading full articles and they wouldn't be so surprised, they had a more direct source, you, and they relied on you to tell the whole truth or at least be honest about the goings-on. But you can't both say that people were misled by the media and also that the media actually did talk about the claims about Apollo during the trial, so no one should be surprised. That makes no sense at all. Also saying lots of people said they didn't feel misled and showing one tweet is, interesting, considering you found a lot more irrelevant information for your other claims. There's also this point Jobst makes about how in the trial that comments in a video by Moist Critical were being unfairly linked back to him. While yes, I'd agree that's shitty, and Jobst isn't directly responsible for the information that Charlie conveys, there is also a sample in the ruling, and those did not come from Moist Critical's video. They come from the original video Jobst made. I do not have access to the trial, so I'm going to have to take Jobst's word for what was shown during it, but it's clear that the judge also considered evidence more directly linked to Jobst's content and comments. I'd be curious to know if there was any overlap in audiences, which I can conclude there more likely will be. Even I, as chronically online as I am, tend not to pay too much attention to drama videos unless they cover a person or situation that I have any vested interest in. It wouldn't be a far leap to assume that as large as Jobst's audience is, there would be likely some overlap and brigading in the comments in Jobst's favor. There is a lot more I could talk about, like how Jobst flew in such reliable witnesses as Moist Critical and Mudahar to testify on his behalf, people who were putting full faith in Jobst to tell the truth and also hated Mitchell, mind you, but this video is already long enough, so I'll conclude with this. Jobst, get some damn help. Your own words in the court filings have disproved many of the things you're saying today. Obviously, people can change their minds, but it only seems you've made up yours, acting like a good boy for the courts, but seething in public for all to see. You've become the boy who cries wolf, which is unfortunate. You had an impact on a community that I'm a part of with your coverage of Doom speedruns, and it sucks we won't have that great impact anymore. But I just don't think anyone can trust you anymore. And you'll be paying for your youthful hubris the rest of your life, which is incredibly unfortunate, but in retrospect, an expected outcome. I'll be happy to eat my words if the appeal goes through, because I actually don't enjoy people being in crippling debt the rest of their lives, but I do hope Jobst learns a valuable lesson.